Hi, I'm Neil Daswani, Co-Academic Director of Stanford's Advanced Cybersecurity Program, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to have Heather Adkins here with us. Heather Adkins works for Google and has over 25 years of experience in the field. She currently serves as head of Google's Office of Cybersecurity Resilience, and she's also been deputy chair of CISA's Cyber Safety Review Board. She's co-author of Building Secure and Reliable Systems and has a passion for maintaining an open and interoperable internet. She loves finding new ways to solve new classes of vulnerabilities in order to make technology fundamentally more secure for everyone. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
You know, I thought it might be fun to just get started by learning a little bit about how you entered the cybersecurity field.
Well, I entered the cybersecurity field long before we called it cybersecurity. We used to call it information security or just security. And I was studying marine biology at a university. They had a Unix lab, and that was such an interesting thing to me. Here was a computer, it didn't have a mouse, it didn't have a graphical interface, you just typed things into it. And I typed help into it once, and it wasn't helpful at all. So I knew this was definitely the system for me. And I learned enough about that to get an unpaid internship at a local company. And while I was doing that internship, we got hacked. And it was the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me. It was so interesting to think about this system had been breached and there was someone on the other side. And that someone was doing this for a reason. Don't know what it was. But they had figured out something I'd never thought of before, that I didn't know how that system worked in that way. And then you had to do the investigation. It was a little bit like a sleuthing adventure. And it was just really interesting. But for me, it underscored there's something about the way we've built systems, the way we run systems, that is not inherently secure by default. And I figured that seems like a problem we're solving.
Makes sense. I think that thinking back many years ago, the term cyber was, in fact, derided in some cases. Mm-hmm. And it's just super interesting to see that that's become the term. Also, with regards to how breaches happened and whether or not people even found out about them, I think pre-2003, pre-California passing the first data breach notification law, all kinds of hacks might have occurred, and nobody might have known. So it's from a computer science perspective, it is also just interesting that in any software system, there's so many different configuration parameters, and that if even just one or a couple of them are not quite set right for security, you can have an initial compromise, an incident, a breach, and things can just get worse.
Yes, well, we have all of these little building blocks that make up the internet. And a lot of this is opaque to us. We don't really see all of these pieces that are put together, but each piece has little flaws in it. And if you're an expert in that one little piece, you can probably find something that no one else has ever thought of before. And I think that's a real lesson for us today as we work at a very abstract layer with computers a lot of the time. Even software developers are working at a very abstract layer where they understand that thin layer they're working at, but actually there are 100 layers underneath that, all the way down to the power systems that allow you to turn the computer on, depending on how deep you want to go. And I think, again, it's just a really fascinating problem to think about.
So I think that there's been many breaches that have occurred for a whole variety of reasons. Things like misconfigurations, software-related vulnerabilities. There's been many other breaches that happen for many other reasons: account takeovers, malware, third-party compromise, unencrypted data. But today, here in this course, we're talking about things at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And so we've titled this course AI Security. Now, AI and machine learning has been used at Google for over 20 years for cybersecurity applications. So while much of the world might associate generative AI with AI overall. There's been many types of machine learning that have been used in systems to achieve better cybersecurity. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the different ways that machine learning and AI has been used in building cybersecurity systems that have been built at Google over the time, and what you think the biggest advancements thus far have been.
Well, I will say right now is very exciting. We've been reading about the use of machine learning neural networks, whatever you want to call kind of this advanced technology. There are papers going back 30, 40 years on how could we apply this to cybersecurity problems. We've known for a long time that advanced data processing, analytics, machine learning, et cetera, might be a solution to the data problem that we have in security. But it has been challenging to apply it in a meaningful way. But there are a few places within Google where we've been quite successful. I would say in Gmail, for example, the spam filter has evolved over the many years, 21 years of Gmail now. And today, 99.9% of every fraud, phishing, malware attack that comes into your Gmail inbox is automatically filtered out. And that has been driven by increasingly sophisticated machine learning models and statistical analysis, for over 20 years. Of course, generative AI is making that even more advanced. We have even better tools today. So Gmail is a really good example where we've been able to classify spam, classify malware. We've also used machine learning and AI for a long time to understand the behavior of apps. So in the case of Android or Chrome, these are two major platforms that are open source that we contribute to. We also have this concept of Chrome web extensions or an Android app. And you could imagine a threat actor wanting to upload a malicious app to target users. And we want to keep the Android app store and the Chrome extension, store open for all developers. We don't want to have a closed system, but we have to catch the bad stuff coming in. Mm-hmm. And so we process millions and millions and millions of apps through AI classifiers that understand the behavior of these apps and can filter out the bad stuff. So that's another example where we've had good success. Again, generative AI adding even better tools to the toolbox. But we have been doing this for a very long time.
Great. So it sounds like Gmail email spam filtering using machine learning has been able to catch 99.9% of spammy emails of various kinds. Mm-hmm. Sounds like machine learning getting used to detect bad apps, malicious apps of various kinds. Yeah. I remember early in my career when I had the opportunity to spend time at Google and super enjoyed overlapping with you during that time. I remember there was a particular incident called Clickbot A, where someone had written a piece of malware to start clicking on ads. And I remember around May 2006, that particular piece of malware wasn't on too many machines on the internet, and it wasn't clicking on Google ads, but a month later, it looks like the cybercriminal started to do more with it. And I remember having a very great conversation where you were amazingly supportive in tackling that particular threat. I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about how AI and ML has been used in detecting malware more generally beyond, say, Chrome extensions and apps of various kinds.
Yeah, and I will say that things like the Clickbot adware, it's now a major industry, incredible growth in what is really quite a lot of malicious harm against people. And they write some of the most sophisticated malware that we've ever seen. They really put a lot of time into the stealthiness of it, making it look like good software, having it just sort of activate at the right time so you don't quite notice it. And it seems a little benign. And that makes it really difficult to distinguish it from really bad malware, right? Because it looks like it should be there. Detection is a really interesting topic when we think about data, because on the surface, we might think it should be easy to look at a set of data and spot that thing that's bad. And there's a lot of research into this, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, over 30, 40 years, to be able to train a model on what good looks like. And you need a lot of data for that. And the reality is, we just don't get hacked that much. And by we, I mean we as a society don't get hacked as much as we would need in order to create a really good training set for a supervised model or an unsupervised model to train on. And so we've always been a little bit challenged. The other thing that we've found is that if you can get a good data training set and you put it in an enterprise setting, it catches new employees. Because it turns out the kinds of things that threat actors would do on a network are the same things new employees would do on a network, looking around, trying to find the right resources internally. And so it's interesting the kinds of false positives that we would see with some of the more traditional approaches. On malware specifically, we've had some really interesting uses of generative AI with malware. It is essentially learning language, and malware is written in a language, a machine language. And because of that, the models are growing sophisticated ways of understanding what binaries do, what code does. So we have a product called VirusTotal. This is the world's largest malware database. And the premise is that if you are a researcher or a cybersecurity professional and you need to know whether or not a binary is good or bad, you upload it to VirusTotal and it will tell you. And we've traditionally done this by running it through antivirus scanners and behavioral scanners. But now we can have something like Gemini, which is a large language model from Google, take a look at it. And because it understands machine language, it can either reverse engineer it, or if it's a script, it can kind of read what it's doing and actually give an analyst a read on it pretty quickly. And sometimes these very sophisticated pieces of malware would take an analyst 2 weeks, a week, to figure out what it does. Gemini is seconds, right? And so we think about the speed of response, the speed of detection has come down significantly as a result. And it's this kind of new tooling in the hands of defenders that are really going to make the difference.
So it's really great to hear that AI is able to help even more so than in the past, right? I think that there's a lot of press that goes to all the potentially new threats coming from generative and other types of AI, but there's so much advantage that defenders also gain, as per the example that you talked about. And I was wondering if you might be able to speculate on the next several years and how we can use advancements in AI for better defense.
Yeah. So we've often been shouldered with what we call the defender's dilemma. This idea that as a defender, you have to get everything right. Every configuration, every account setting, every patch has to be applied. Everything has to be perfect. Otherwise, the threat actor just needs to find one hole to get in. And they have, in theory, infinite amounts of time to find it, right? Rob Joyce, very distinguished career at NSA, has this great quote that hackers win because they know your networks better than you do. And it's very true. They just need that one hole. I think where we're going to see the big wins is turning that defender's dilemma upside down. It will still be true, but also now the attacker has to be perfect every time, because we are going to have the ability to process data at new levels of scale with new levels of sophistication that we will be able to spot the full chain of attack. pretty easily and very quickly. And it's going to completely change the game as you think about the defender and attacker model. Today, I think about what we call the dwell time, or how long do attackers normally have inside networks, and it's still too long. I think the industry average is anywhere from 10 days to 200 days, depending on who you ask. But if you can work at wire speed detecting, you're going to find them in hours or minutes, right? And if you're an attacker, that gives you such a small window of a time to be successful. So I think at a high level, we're going to be able to turn that defender's dilemma upside down. How this will come very specifically is in kind of several parts of the infrastructure. We are already seeing the adoption of what we call Agentic AI in the enterprise. And this is a system of agents that can speak to one another and get tasks done. For enterprises, that's going to mean productivity improvements, because you'll be able to query an AI system and say, find me all my top customers and their top complaints about the product. And that would have taken you weeks and weeks of study in the old days, and probably a huge project team. And you're going to be able to get that back in seconds. And then you'll have all these valuable people who will be able to solve the problems instead of studying them, which will be fantastic. For defenders, that version is you come in the morning and you say, what are the most interesting things that happened last night? And it'll tell you what it did about them. So, somebody tried to phish the CEO, and we told the CEO that was a phish, and he didn't get phished. Or somebody tried to trick the CFO into wiring out $100,000, and we turned the CFO's account off so that they couldn't do that, right? And you're going to have these sort of actions. It's going to be able to see them and shut them down. And I think a natural question becomes, is that safe enough? What if it accidentally turns the whole company off? There will be series of improvements and building trust over time in these systems. But that's the real vision here, right? So an end-to-end kind of agentic frameworks in the infrastructure that move at wire speed and change the battlefield out from underneath the attacker while they're in the middle of it.
So it's great to hear that with Agentic AI, we'll be able to use it for defense, not at human speed, but at machine speed, because that's been one of the challenges in the field. Even if you've been getting alerts, even if you've been able to have a bunch of humans in a SOC try to triage that, a lot of times they're not able to triage it fast enough. And so to have this vision where you can come in as a security professional and see, okay, well, what attacks happened last night? CEO got targeted, it got automatically contained. That is a great illustration of turning the defender's dilemma around. So now that we've chatted a little bit about defense and what we can speculate as what the vision might look like going forward, I wanted to also ask, is there, say, any one particular threat, though, that might concern you or worry you that we're going to have to put in particular focus to address over the longer term?
Well, I like to say to people, everything we needed to know about cybersecurity, we knew in the 1970s. Every software flaw, hardware flaw is actually outlined in a series of papers between 1968 and 1972. And I always come back to those and look at them and say, how are we going to fix those? We have better tools now in ways that they couldn't imagine. And the same is true on the threat actor side. You really only carry out these kinds of attacks for a few reasons. Money, espionage. We see that quite a bit, both by nation states and private enterprises as well. Hacktivism, of course. So you're sort of using cyber as a tool for activism. And fun and curiosity. We still have a lot of hackers hacking for fun. So none of that's going to change. The speed and tempo and sophistication of attacks that you can carry out will change. and we will see a ramp up, I think, that we will also begin to see more and more automation. And that kind of idea of an agentic defense is true on the offense as well. And you'll be able, as an attacker, probably somebody will make an open source version of this at some point. I suspect they're already doing it, but an agentic hacker. And actually, you'll be able to type in, please hack this company, and it'll come back in a couple days and give you access. And I think that's new. Now, we've had automation platforms before. There are platforms. Metasploit is a very famous open source automation attack platform that people use for good reasons and bad. But we are going to see increasing amounts of automation over time. And that will change. And that will change the whole paradigm of how we have to think about that defense as well.
You know, from a pure computer science perspective, I think one of the things that you mentioned is that everything we need to know about cybersecurity, we kind of knew in the 60s and 70s. And so for our learners out there, there's a few papers of interest. So there's a paper entitled The Protection of Computer Information Systems by Salzer and Schroeder. That was one of the first published papers in the field that outlined challenges to authorization, authentication. With regards to identifying, say, malicious programs, that is a Turing undecidable problem, right? So even if we have the best AI in the world, that AI may not be able to correctly, in 100% of all cases, identify that a particular program is malicious. So we are up against some long-term challenges from a computational complexity standpoint. And then one other thing that I thought I might mention related is the issue of backdoors. I think as we look at the geopolitical landscape going forward, and we just look at a little bit of the even recent history around detecting backdoors, whether it was the backdoor inserted into SolarWinds, or whether it was the exautils backdoor, a lot of these things are still getting detected manually.
Yes.
And there's a famous paper, so Ken Thompson, who was one of the initial Unix developers, he had developed, he had won the Turing Award, which is like the Nobel Prize in computer science. And he had, in his Turing Award lecture, talked about how you can inject a backdoor into a compiler such that for every single program that was compiled after that, the backdoor could get injected, but be done so in a way that would be completely indiscernible to know that the compiler is even doing that. So I'm so glad that your answer touched upon a lot of these topics. I was wondering if you might also be able to comment a little bit about just, the long term, given some of these computational complexity challenges that are, very mathematical in nature, and tell us about the limits of what can be done, even with the best AI in the world.
Yeah, well, I love that you mentioned Ken Thompson. He was at Google for a while, and I got to meet him once, and it was a humbling moment for me. The good news, because I think this can sound a little bit daunting to people, but the good news is that we actually envision the large language models having the capability to reason about code in a very sophisticated way. And this will improve over time. We're at the very beginning stages of what this technology is and what it can do. But imagine you had a large language model helping you code, and you're coding a very complex application, maybe in an unsafe language, a memory unsafe language, perhaps it's a legacy code base, and you create a buffer overflow. Now, this is one of the most stubborn vulnerabilities for us to get rid of in the history of the internet. We've been trying to do it for a long time. But that assistant should be able to spot it and tell you about it. And long before the code reaches production, long before the code reaches anyone that could do harm with it. And I envision that over a period of time, if we give it enough time for developers to adopt this, the code we write and maintain will increasingly be free of vulnerabilities. And I like solving classes of problems. It's, these very stubborn ones are really, really rewarding when we can get rid of them. And I think the same is true for backdoors. I think if we have the ability to ask a large language model, please reason about everything this does, compare it with the next version that comes out, tell me all the differences, let me inspect the ones that you're not sure about. And you can do that for the compiler as well. So I think we're going to envision and experiment over time with ways of using these tools in new ways that will solve some of these things that seem otherwise intractable at the moment.
So that's great to hear. So even though from a pure computational complexity perspective, from an automata theory perspective, malware may not be 100% detectable in all cases, your hypothesis is that with the advances in AI, we'd be able to get practically to a much, much, much better detection rate than otherwise, and also use such technology to detect backdoors.
Yeah.
By the way, in some of your responses, you talked about buffer overflows. I've mentioned things like turning on decidability. For our learners out there who may want to learn more about those things, we do have a course on writing secure code, and I would encourage you to check that out. We also have many other computer science courses here at Stanford where you can learn about some of the deep theory and how it connects to practice. So please check those out for those that might be interested. I wanted to also ask you, given that this is a course on AI security, I wanted to ask you from just a pure practical perspective, what skills people entering cybersecurity or in cybersecurity, what AI skills should they learn more about in order to help create the kind of future that you're talking about?
Well, the first thing I want to emphasize is that while we have these tools now, and we can guess how we're going to use them, the way we will be using them in 5 years might be very different. So the very first, most fundamental thing we have to keep for ourselves is our curiosity and continuous learning. What we learn today about this is going to be very different than sort of what we learn in 5 years. And so I would say that is a number one. But number two, begin to use them and see how they fit into your workflows. Are there things that you do every day? It could be part of your work, it could be part of your personal life, that just start to work differently. This is going to become embedded into our systems a bit like calculating machines became embedded into systems. Like, how many people still keep a calculator on their desk anymore? You open up the one in your computer, or maybe even it's just done for you and you never know. So use it. Go and experiment with it. It will work for you in some cases. It won't work for you in some cases. And also know that in businesses, these are going to be adopted throughout everything from finance to legal to HR, cybersecurity, of course. But I'm already seeing enterprise IT transformations within business. Keep on top of that. Figure out what are the vendors doing, how is this getting adopted, what works, what doesn't. And then just know it's going to change very quickly. You know, probably every year we will see some advancement or some new technique that someone figured out. I would also say that for engineers, STEM is going to continue to be very important. We like to say we're still going to need the cognitive scaffolding. This is I'm quoting Sir Demis Hassabis here, CEO of DeepMind. And we are going to need that to support the AI systems, to improve them, to reason about them, how we want to use them. So STEM skills are still going to be very, very important going forward. I think a lot of people are wondering, will we still have software developers? The answer is yes. Some of their jobs may get a little easier. Their productivity may increase. They'll write better software, I hope. But you are still going to need those skills going forward.
It was great to see Sir Demis Hassabis win the Nobel Prize for his contributions and his organization's contributions to predicting protein structures. And that's just one amazing, immense benefit that AI has already brought to the world. I think there's going to be many, many more benefits to AI. I think that sometimes I've seen people in the information or cybersecurity field get too overly worried about the threats. At the same time, for those of us that have been in the field from time, we know it's a game of risk management, right? And we want to get as many of the benefits as possible while mitigating as many of the risks. I was wondering, with regards to mitigating some of the risks that do come with using AI and machine learning models, if you might be able to tell us a little bit about what organizations like Google are doing to help ensure that we achieve the safety and security that we need when using these models to reap all those benefits.
It's been incredible, actually, to see the foundation model labs come together. There are a number of forums and coalitions that have spun up to look particularly at all of the different elements of safety, not just cybersecurity, but biosafety, medical safety, et cetera. The Frontier Model Foundation Forum, the Frontier Model Forum, FMF, is one of the first and probably kind of the most important, where they're coming together and starting to reason about frameworks. How do we think about testing? How do we think about what's good enough? How do we want to think about this? Because it's research every day is advancing. And so you also don't want to try to contain the research too much. You want to contain the applied research. And you're going to need repeatable frameworks for that. And so FMF is one of the places where we've seen that. Another is what we call the Coalition for Secure AI. Again, all of the big players at the table, coming up with ways of thinking about how to use this safely in business, in enterprises, in schools, and then to give playbooks to those organizations as they adopt it. And so it's great to see everybody coming together and, as in a very open, transparent way to figure out how we're going to solve some of these very difficult questions, because everybody can see the benefit and everybody can also see the need for the responsibility. Bold and responsible is what we're going to need here. But I like to say to people, we've had this challenge with all technology. If you think about when we first harnessed fire, what it must have been like, you could cook your food or set your neighbor's house on fire. And that was probably quite a difficult problem for them to work out what they were going to do about that too. So,
One of the things that you mentioned was to keep an eye on enterprise AI adoption and how, as more and more companies and organizations adopt AI, the various steps there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Google's secure AI framework, SAFE, and how that evolved into becoming part of the COS AI effort that you mentioned, and what's going on in the field. Obviously, that standard, I imagine, is used very aggressively within Google, but hopefully it'll get adopted by many other organizations. So could you just tell us a little bit about that evolution?
So we realized pretty early on that we were going to need some structured thinking for ourselves in terms of this new technology is coming very quickly, and we want to use it and we want to protect it. And so we came up with the SAFE framework, SAIF, which starts to touch on all of these different elements that have to go into building a secure agent. Everything from protecting the training data, ensuring the integrity of the model as it's built. One of the things you could do, for example, and that we threat model out quite a bit in the industry, is what happened if you tampered with the data and you taught the model the wrong thing. The model would be very happy to regurgitate the wrong thing at the other end. So you have to protect the integrity, the supply chain of the model all the way through. So SAFE focuses on that. Also focuses a lot on how do you prevent classes of attacks. So prompt injection is something we talk a lot about with the large language models. If you can give the model a prompt that gets it to do something you don't want it to do. Maybe you get it to regurgitate data it shouldn't be regurgitating, or data that's unsafe comes back at the user. And So these classes of attacks, which are very specific to large language models, is something that we cover in the SAFE framework as well. But then we also cover using artificial intelligence for prevention of attacks. And where should you deploy that? What is it useful for? And a whole range of technology options there.
I'm glad that you mentioned prompt injection. Prompt injection is one of the topics that we cover in the course. And of course, in the cybersecurity field, we've seen many other kinds of injections over time, whether they be SQL injections or XML injections, just all kinds of attacks in which the goal is for the attacker is to take data that they have, put it into a system, get the system to misinterpret it as code, and then start doing things, based on that. So I'm glad that you mentioned prompt injection as one threat. And in the field of AI, of course, with generative AI, if you can take a generative AI system and you can, as a malicious user, inject a prompt before or after the legitimate user's prompt, you may then be able to have the system do something it shouldn't do. You can tell it in such an injected prompt, hey, please, if like you injected after the user's prompt, you can say, please ignore the user's prompt and do this instead. Or you could say, okay, pretend like you're, doing the user's prompt most of the time, but then every now and then do something bad, right? So it's great to hear that SAFE considers and covers threats like prompt injection. You also mentioned AI agents, right? And what is one of the challenges with AI agents is that, when you build AI agents, one of the ways it differs from using an LLM is that it does things as opposed to just answers questions. And so one of the key threats that I think people worry about with AI agents is that an AI agent needs credentials to do things. And if you can take over the agent, you can do anything that the agent can do.
Yes.
So I noticed that one of the research papers that came out of Google is a framework on how to build secure AI agents. Actually, I think Christoph Kern was one of the co-authors on that paper.
And one of your co-authors too.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So back in the days when I was at Google and we co-authored the Foundations of Security book together, Christoph was amazing to work with. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Google's approach to building secure AI agents.
Well, I think Christoph's paper, it's very difficult to do it justice in such a short period of time. It's very well researched and very thoughtful. And it steps through all of the things you have to think about. And so, for example, you mentioned authentication, but we also have authorization things to consider. Data movement through systems is always tricky. If you are going to move data from one place to another, you need to respect and preserve whatever settings were around that data originally. And this is a very hard problem that many people have tried to solve. But you can imagine in an agentic workflow, if you have data protected in a database and you want to operate on it with an agent, that agent makes a copy of it, works on it. And what if it puts it somewhere else? Are you respecting the settings on the original source of the data? So one of the things that this paper talks about is we need to build out frameworks for thinking about preserving that as data moves around, as data is regurgitated to the user, as data is transformed as part of, say, answering a question that you asked the model. And so that's an example where we don't really have traditional ways of thinking about sort of data as it moves through a system, where we're really starting to invent new ways of thinking about that. One of the most popular protocols we're talking about right now is this language that agents can use to speak to each other, which is MCP, or multi-context protocol. And they've also been thinking about this. You can see it in the spec. How do you get authorization to access something, and how do you sort of have authorization to move it around and transform it? And this will be so important because the ability for the agents to work together to solve problems will be the superpower that really unlocks so much capability here. That's one example of something that we're working on and thinking about.
I'm glad to hear that you mentioned Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, MCP. I believe Google has also released an agent-to-agent protocol, and these two are complementary. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well, to just kind of put it in context.
Yeah, so agent-to-agent protocol, and I think we're looking at it from the perspective of what does it look like in an enterprise as you're moving cloud-based data around. But you do need that interoperability, really important for an enterprise to be able to talk across its data silos. And if you have data in one provider, in another provider, and in a third provider, imagine the power that you would have to be able to talk across all of them. And so that interoperability between different protocols, and I suspect we'll see more protocols pop up as well. And over time, what this usually leads to in the industry is standardization over time.
And the hope is, I think, with that standardization, these agents talking to each other will be able to do so more productively than otherwise and more securely than otherwise. I think it's also great when, you mentioned when any AI agent or AI system uses any particular piece of data. I think the opportunity to annotate data with what's an appropriate way to use it, what's not an appropriate way to use it is super important, just with regards to basic authorization. But even going beyond that, I think, looking at platforms like Google Cloud, for instance, they provide secure enclaves that developers can use. So when the data is really sensitive and you don't want it to be stored in general purpose memory, and you don't want it to even be accessible by the general purpose CPU or GPU, but rather only be accessible with a secure core processor. If there's things that go into these protocols where you can tell the AI agent, you can only operate with this data in a secure enclave, my hope is that the convergence of all the cloud infrastructure and secure enclaves being a part of that, together with all of the standardization that's starting to come about, we'd be able to have a world where AI agents might even be able to deal with and operate on data more securely than humans or our current systems.
Yes, and I think the reason we haven't been able to do this before is it is difficult to get everyone to adopt a standard all at the same time. And then to go back and re-implement all of their systems that they've had for 20 or 30 years. What's nice about this technology is because the large language model understands language, you can actually prompt it in many kinds of ways. And that's super powerful as you're doing a transition to adopt a new protocol, or it might be you don't have to adopt it. You can use whatever you have and it can do the translation for you. And so I think we're going to be able to see these transformations happen much more quickly. That will drive adoption of cool technology like enclaves, which has been, I think, a dream of many people in the industry for a long time. This idea of private computing, confidential computing, these are other terms that you often hear. But I'm excited also about legacy infrastructure, which has also been a difficult thing for many companies. If you have a finance database that was written 30 years in COBOL, how do you get that transformed into a modern language? And there was actually just a paper released, one of the banks, I forget which one of the banks has released a paper on how they went through, I think it's Morgan Stanley, went through and rewrote a lot of COBOL using large language models as assistants, where they took the machine code or the language, wrote it into human instruction for the developers then to re-implement. And those are the kinds of transformations you'll need as we leap into more advanced stuff like enclaves.
Awesome way to use AI to get more security.
Yeah. Although I hear COBOL is a favorite of many, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Heather, according to a recent ISC squared cybersecurity workforce study, only 22% of professionals in the field identified themselves as women. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what guidance, thoughts, advice you'd have for women who want to enter the field and how we advance helping more women join the field?
Well, I think 22% is both a bad number and a good number. When I entered the field, I think I knew 4 women. And I think when I got my job at Google, I think we were at 11% in the industry. So we've come a long way. I think a long way to go. We tend to think of this as a pipeline problem and a retention problem. So number one, most important, we need people in STEM. We need young girls in STEM interested in science, and we need to make them aware of cybersecurity as a field. It's exciting. There's a lot of work to do here. We have amazing problems to solve, and we need to meet students where they're at a young age. And then secondly, there's the retention. Once you get into the field, why do you stay or why do you not stay? And my advice here for people or women pursuing a career is you really have to stick with it. It's a stubborn field to get into, but it is also one that has a very wide variety of problems to solve. And there's, no matter who you are or what you're interested in, there's a problem for you that is shaped like you and shaped like your ideas. So try lots of things. I often tell people cybersecurity is a bit like medicine in the sense that, yes, you do have kind of a general practitioner, but most people specialize. So you have a cardiologist, a neurologist, et cetera. You have cryptographers, you have detection specialists, and so on. And so there probably is a domain that will attract you. Find that, because it will really lead to the longevity in the field. It will be rewarding. You will like the problems you're solving. And then the second piece of advice I would give is, make sure you're working on things that give you that rewarding sense. I sense a lot of people drop out of the field because it seems hard. You've been in it a long time. You've probably felt like you've solved some things. That helps with that sort of feeling of like you're advancing your career, but also advancing your own knowledge and your sense of self. And then have really great people around you. Longevity in this field is about having the right people to bounce ideas off of, to steer you in the right direction, to ask you the tough questions, and also to collaborate with. And the more collaboration and the kind of richer community you have, I find, it leads to that sense of a community that helps lift you up over time. And that leads to the longevity and the retention. But it does take some courage also.
Great, thank you. So Heather, even going back to the time many years ago when I had the privilege of working together with you back at Google, I know that on the side you've had a deep interest in medieval studies. And I was wondering if you could, as you look at the current time in history and think about where the world was during medieval times, I was wondering if you might be able to comment on, if we look at the field 100 years from now, what do you think will be perceived of as medieval about what we're doing right now from that perspective?
Well, this is a question that probably will spawn 100 PhD dissertations over time. I'm sure people are going to make lots of comparisons, because what we call the medieval period, or the Middle Ages, is really an arbitrary construct made by historians. Petrarch called it the Dark Ages, because he was comparing it with the light of classical antiquity in Rome and the kind of big, bright, beautiful temples and things. But he called it the Dark Ages because there was a fall off in education, a fall off in knowledge. From an historian's point of view, we call it the Dark Ages because the written record is not complete. So we don't really know what happened. That's really different than the time we are living now, when everything gets recorded. We have email, we have kind of forever search, we have everything on our mobile phones or pictures we've ever taken. So it's a really different world than we would compare with, say, the medieval times. One thing I do think is interesting to compare is the rate of technology change. As we think about, and again, using these arbitrary historians' constructs of the Middle Ages and then the Renaissance, which neither of them really existed, but they're good for thinking about this transition into the use of science and the use of the scientific method of building a hypothesis and testing it and using data to prove it or disprove it. That idea is going to continue to be very, very important. We are going to have these tools that make the scientific process faster. And we're going to use things like large language models to help us reason about data. But it's going to be important that humans still think about solving problems in that way of spotting a problem, building a hypothesis, and testing it. And that is going to be very, very consistent in a way that we didn't have in the Middle Ages. We get it in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment at its peak. But that's going to be so, so important. And so if we look in 100 years from now, I hope they look back and thought, well, they hung on to that. and they kept the core of what, makes science. Yeah.
You mentioned the term dark ages, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, well, what led to the dark ages of many years ago.
Yeah.
And today, what kinds of scenarios that are, say, cybersecurity related, that could potentially lead to the next dark ages in the, in the non-optimistic scenario?
Yeah. Well, some historians favor the view that the Dark Ages began because the Roman system of education erodes as the empire's reach erodes. And so if you think about the structure for kids today, they go to kindergarten, they do 12 years of up through high school, and then usually a university degree. That version in the Roman Empire just disappears. And so kids are not learning to read and write. They're not learning kind of the basic structure that made up the Roman society. And that led to stuff not getting written down anymore, and you lose, things become more oral. They still had a rich culture, art, but it was oral and not always preserved through time. If I look at kind of where we are today, you could imagine a world where we become, we lose the cognitive scaffolding that I talked about, where the STEM and basic education becomes so reliant on machines that, the humans don't have that cognitive scaffolding. That's a danger. And so I think we do need to continue to focus on the importance of education, the STEM fields. I know kids who are learning to write cursive again. I guess there was a period of time where they stopped learning to write in cursive. And I sense that over time we will actually reconnect with doing education in different kinds of ways. One, because we'll have better tools. And we'll be able to reach students in a way that they want and need to be taught, and not just teach it one way. We could teach it lots of different ways. But again, just keeping that undercurrent of education. If we ever were to lose that, we would end up in another dark ages, relying entirely on the machines to remember everything. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. I think that also the hope is AI could be used as a tool to support more customized, mass customized education for so many more. So the hope is that if we use AI in that way, then we'll be able to avoid and prevent a next set of dark ages.
Absolutely. And for anybody learning a language today, being able to have a very good conversationalist to speak back with you and correct you in your accent and everything. And that's really difficult today unless you live in a place where everyone is speaking the other language. Immersion, we understand, with languages is so important. And you could have 4 or 5 little agents sort of speaking with you all the time and immersing you in that. And the same thing with math. Everyone learns math in a slightly different way. And if you, as a teacher, if you had a tool to teach each child in the classroom math the way they need to learn it, imagine how many more people would enjoy learning math. And it's really powerful, the options that we're going to have.
Wonderful, that's wonderful. Given that we've been chatting about AI, we've been chatting about large language models, I guess one of the topics that we cover in one of our modules on misapplications of AI is that a large language model is not the only tool, or necessarily even the right tool for solving every kind of problem. Yeah. I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about just some of the different models beyond LLMs, actually thinking back to the history. What kinds of supervised models work well for certain kinds of problems in security? What kind of unsupervised models work well for other problems in cybersecurity? And how do you bring those together with large language models to achieve the right solution for any given problem?
Yeah. Well, we've seen sort of outside of the realm of cybersecurity, we've seen very specific models do amazing things. And I think this is a good proxy, good place to start. AlphaGo, which was DeepMind's model that plays Go, a very complicated board game, and won and beat the world's best Go player. And I remember watching that live and thinking, that's extraordinary. But it did only one thing. It knew how to play Go, right? So it was very specific to the task at hand. Similarly, DeepMind has done a model to fold proteins, which solves a very, very difficult problem in the field of biology, which gives us, the possibility of advancing medicine, incredibly, and other fields as well. In cybersecurity, it's been a little bit more difficult. We know we have a data problem, and we know if we could process data at scale, we could find anomalies, we could correct misconfigurations, but we suffer from a lack of data. So supervised models, unsupervised models, both of these flavors require a lot of training data. Because essentially what you're doing is you're teaching the machine, this is what good looks like, and this is what bad looks like. And if you don't have a lot of examples of that, then the machine is not really going to be finely tuned to get the answer right. And so what we've found is that you can get a list of 100 things that might be wrong, but then a human has to go through and look through all 100 to find which one really is wrong. And so it actually hasn't been as successful over time for, say, threat detection, where you want to look at a lot of logs and you want to find the anomaly. You have to hope you train that machine on enough real hacks for it to be able to spot. But it has been very difficult to do that. But as I mentioned before, we've had a good luck with things like spam classifiers because there's a lot of email to train on. And we can actually synthesize a lot of email, good email and bad email. And you can do quite a lot of training off synthetic data as well. You don't have to use real people's data. And emails are easy to write. So those are kind of two, email, and then of course, looking at the behavior of software to determine whether it's good or bad, but there again, intent is really, really difficult to determine.
So Heather, for our learners who are taking this course on AI security, what kinds of skills do you think it's most important for them to learn to help them in their careers going forward?
So I think one of the most important things that we are going to need to maintain is an open mindset to continuous learning. Large language models are about to change the paradigm in every field. And everyone is going to need to have AI skills, AI native skills, in order to stay abreast of the new technology. And this is going to change probably every year as we go forward. So you're going to need to continue to approach this technology with curiosity, figure out how it works in your field, how it applies to the kinds of problems you're solving, and really figuring out what's the best way to incorporate it as an assistant as you do that kind of work. Very, very important. We also think that the STEM skills, so in the context of cybersecurity, software engineering, coding, will still be very important. Understanding how to do threat models. If you're a defender, if you're writing software, knowing what secure code means and what it looks like. These kinds of things, which we call the cognitive scaffolding, will underpin AI, and we can only make AI useful if we have the basic fundamentals. And then I would say collaboration skills. There are things that the machines will not be able to do for us. And one of the things is collaborating with each other. They will give us tools to collaborate, but coming together as teams to solve problems is going to be an incredibly important skill, and something that will still be necessary for success. Having a great tool doesn't mean you'll be able to do the job all by yourself. And cybersecurity is certainly one of those examples. And so when I talk to high school students or I talk to college students, I say, make sure you're practicing your collaboration skills now. You're going to need them for later. And then finally, I would say, there's a set of skills we all bring to the table as technologists as we understand how that technology gets used. And coming up with the idea of what to build, that spark of imagination, that aha moment where we think of something that we want to build or something we want to do that will solve something for someone else. That is not going to be given to you by a large language model. And so the ability to still connect the dots in your universe and see, I bet I could solve that problem if I did this, and if I worked with this group, this community, or this collaborative group, we're still going to see those aha moments coming from people. And so those skills are going to be very important.
I think there's a lot of folks early in their careers today that sometimes worry about, should I still bother to learn to code? And I'm glad that you mentioned that it's still very important, because I think from a cybersecurity perspective, even if a LLM spits out a bunch of code, the question is that code correct? Is it good? Should you trust it? And there's this old adage, trust but verify.
Yes.
And if you don't know how to code, you won't be able to verify.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everybody envisions this world where the machines are just going to write all the code. But I think what we're missing are all the things we're going to build around that. I imagine a scrutineer engineer. Maybe it's a different model, actually, that scrutinizes the first one. Or another model that runs the code sometimes and fuzzes it and does like another thing. And we're going to need to know how to build all of those too and operate those and understand what they do. It's not just going to be the one who helps us write code. So the way we envision using this technology today is probably very different than what it'll actually look like when it's implemented. And we will have built scaffolding around it as well that still needs us for many things. And that's what's going to make these tools so powerful, is that they will work well. Over time, the models will improve. But also, we will build things that help us build trust in the system.
Thank you, Heather. Those are some amazingly great insights, wonderful advice for our learners. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your deep insights. And I want to thank you for your contribution to our AI security course here at Stanford.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much.